Imagine arriving at a crime scene in a wealthy hunter's mansion and finding his mutilated body. But the real horror begins the moment you notice that the giant elk trophy has been torn off the wall. And now, that deadhead is hunting you. Whoa, that story is something else. Today I'm going out to kill a dragon in Minecraft, and I put together a lineup of stories for you. Enjoy! Story 1. I work in law enforcement. My partner and I just lied on an official police report because nobody would believe what we shot at tonight. I work the graveyard patrol in a jurisdiction where the trees outnumber the people 10,000 to 1. A vast, deeply isolated county, dominated by dense pine forests, winding dirt logging routes, and sprawling properties owned by people who value extreme privacy. You get used to the quiet, you'll learn to appreciate the long hours of driving through pitch-black roads with nothing but the hum of the engine and the dashboard lights to keep you company. My partner and I were parked near a deserted county intersection, drinking lukewarm coffee from thermos flasks, when the radio mounted on the dashboard crackled to life. The dispatcher's voice broke through the static. A veteran operator, someone who usually handled horrific car accidents and domestic disputes with a flat, unwavering calm. Tonight her voice was entirely different, elevated, tight with genuine stress. Unit 4. I need you to respond to a 1054 at the estate at the end of the Upper Ridge Road. I have an open line with the homeowner. He is frantic. I cannot get a clear read on the situation. My partner grabbed the radio microphone. Dispatch, can you confirm the nature of the intruder? Is the caller providing a description? Negative. The dispatcher replied, a faint tremor echoing over the frequency. The caller is not speaking to me anymore. I am just hearing background noise. It sounds like heavy hooves, like livestock stomping on a hardwood floor, and a man screaming. The transmission cut off, leaving a heavy, oppressive silence in the cab of our cruiser. My partner and I exchanged a single hard look. He dropped the vehicle into drive, flipped on the emergency lights without hitting the sirens, and floored the accelerator. The drive took nearly 20 minutes. The paved highway eventually gave way to a deeply rutted, unpaved gravel road that wound steeply up into the heavily forested hills. The tree canopy grew incredibly dense, the interlocking branches blocking out the moonlight and creating a suffocating tunnel of darkness around the speeding cruiser. We finally breached the tree line and pulled into a massive, circular driveway. The property was a sprawling, multi-story log cabin built from incredibly thick, dark timber. It belonged to a notoriously wealthy, big-game hunter, a man who spent his fortune traveling the globe to harvest exotic trophies. The house sat in total darkness. Not a single exterior light was burning. We stepped out of the cruiser, drawing our heavy flashlights and our service weapons. The night air was freezing. We approached the front porch, keeping our boots light on the wooden planks. We did not need to knock. The massive, heavy oak front door had been completely obliterated. The thick wooden panels were fractured and splintered, but the damage had not been inflicted by someone trying to break in. The jagged shards of wood were pushed outward, pointing toward the porch. Something had violently smashed its way out of the house. Someone wanted out in a massive hurry, my partner whispered, holding his weapon tightly against his chest. Or something pushed them out, I replied, keeping my voice incredibly low. We stepped carefully over the splintered wood and entered the cabin. The interior was a cavernous, vaulted space completely dedicated to death. The walls were lined top to bottom with an absurd collection of taxidermy mounts. Massive grizzly bears stood in the corners, permanently frozen in aggressive, roaring postures. Timber wolves stalked across the upper lofts, and dozens of heavily antlered deer heads protruded from the dark timber walls. Our flashlight beams swept across the room, catching the reflection of hundreds of polished glass eyes staring blindly back at us from the dark. The air inside the house was thick and stale, smelling heavily of formaldehyde and fresh, pooling blood. "Clear the ground floor," my partner ordered, moving slowly toward the kitchen archway. "Keep your angles tight. Whatever did this could still be in here." I moved toward the massive stone fireplace dominating the center of the living room. The heavy leather furniture had been tossed aside, the heavy coffee table overturned and splintered. I found the homeowner resting against the base of the stone hearth. He was dead. The scene was incredibly brutal. His chest and abdomen had been violently gored, punctured by multiple deep, jagged wounds that were entirely too wide and ragged to have been caused by a knife or a spear. His eyes were wide open, locked in an expression of terror. "I have a victim," I called out softly. "He is gone." Massive puncture trauma. My partner emerged from the kitchen, stepping carefully around the overturned furniture. He aimed his light down at the body, his jaw setting into a hard, rigid line. If this was a bear or a feral animal that got inside, we would see muddy tracks, my partner said, sweeping his flashlight across the pristine hardwood floor surrounding the blood pool. "There is no mud. There are no paw prints leading to the door." I lowered my beam to the floor. My partner was right. There were no tracks. However, there was a distinct, highly unusual trail leading away from the body toward the dark hallway. Dry, yellowed synthetic stuffing, small clumps of brittle animal hair, thin, rusted pieces of shaping wire. I followed the trail of debris with my light, letting the beam travel slowly up the adjacent timber wall. The wall was decorated with a series of framed Polaroid photographs. They featured the homeowner standing proudly in this exact living room, holding a hunting rifle, posing beneath his various trophies. I looked closely at the photograph positioned directly at eye level. It showed the man smiling widely, standing beneath a truly massive, record-breaking elk head, mounted on a heavy wooden plaque above the stone fireplace. I immediately raised my flashlight, aiming the concentrated beam directly at the space above the stone hearth. The heavy wooden plaque was securely bolted to the timber, but the plaque was entirely empty. The iron bolts that normally secured the mount had been violently ripped outward. The massive elk head was missing. "The elk is gone," I said, a cold knot forming rapidly in my stomach. "What are you talking about?" my partner asked, keeping his weapon aimed down the dark hallway. "Look at the picture on the wall," I insisted, pointing my beam at the photograph and then back up to the empty wooden plaque. "Look at the mount. There." It was ripped off the wall. My partner began to respond, and that was when the sound came from the dark hallway. Not footsteps, not a single impact. Something in between, a heavy, uneven thumping, as if something very large was awkwardly repositioning itself in a narrow passage. The thumping was accompanied by a wet, leathery creaking, dense fabric dragging against wood. And then one more sound, a dull, rhythmic scraping dragging steadily along the upper door frame. Something too tall for the space, brushing the ceiling. We scrambled away from the hallway, diving frantically into a heavy set of double doors just off the main living area. We slammed the thick oak door shut behind us, the heavy brass latch engaging with a sharp click. "Brace it!" my partner shouted. We threw our combined body weight against a massive solid wood bookshelf sitting against the wall, dragging it aggressively across the carpet until it completely blocked the double doors. A second later, a devastating force slammed into the other side of the wood. The oak doors groaned violently, the hinges straining and protesting under the immense weight of the creature attempting to batter its way inside. The sharp points of the antlers pierced entirely through the upper panels of the wood, splintering the oak, and retreated for another strike. We backed away from the barricade, sweeping our lights around the enclosed space. We were trapped in the homeowner's private study. The room was cluttered and chaotic. Empty glass liquor bottles were scattered heavily across the expensive rugs, and dozens of half-burned candles sat in pools of melted wax on the surfaces. Sitting directly in the center of a heavy desk was an open, leather-bound journal. I rushed to the desk, illuminating the pages with my flashlight. "Keep your weapon on the door," I told my partner, leaning over the messy, frantic handwriting scrawled across the paper. The entries were unhinged, heavily detailing a deep, unraveling paranoia. I read the scattered paragraphs rapidly as the heavy rhythmic battering continued against the barricaded doors. The woods are deeply angry. I took far too much from the tree line. I hunted for sport, and now the forest is hunting me. The spirit is ancient. It lives in the timber. It watches me from the edge of the property line every single night. I can feel the vapor of it pressing against the windows. I flipped the page, my hands trembling as the heavy oak doors splintered further under another violent impact. I brought a medium out here. He told me the spirit is vaporous. It cannot be shot or trapped in its natural state. He told me it requires a physical tether, a vessel to anchor the vapor to the physical plane. If I construct a vessel worthy of the forest, the spirit will inhabit it out of pure vanity. I spent 3 days stitching the pieces together in the workshop. A body for the forest. If I can lure the ghost inside the effigy, it will be trapped within the physical materials. Then I can burn the wood and the hide. I can kill the ghost by burning the vessel. I looked up from the journal, the terrifying reality of the situation rapidly assembling itself in my mind. Bullets will never stop that thing. I yelled over the deafening sound of the antlers shredding the upper door panels. It is just dry hide, glass, and wire. The journal says it is a spiritual tether. We have to destroy the vessel. Then what the hell do we do? My partner demanded, his weapon trembling slightly as he aimed at the fracturing wood. I looked down at the floor, sweeping my beam over the scattered debris. Near the leg of the desk, I spotted a large glass bottle of bourbon, still a quarter full of amber liquid. I snatched the bottle off the floor. I grabbed a heavy cloth curtain hanging near the window, drew my tactical folding knife, and violently sliced a long thick strip of the fabric free. I shoved at one end of the cloth deep into the narrow neck of the glass bottle, ensuring it soaked heavily in the high-proof alcohol, leaving the dry end hanging out like a crude wick. "Get your lighter ready," I told him, stepping directly in front of the barricaded doors, gripping the neck of the glass bottle tightly in my right hand. "When the door gives way, you light the fabric. Do not hesitate." My partner holstered his firearm, his hand shaking as he pulled a metal Zippo lighter from his vest. He flipped the lid. The small bright flame illuminated his pale face. The heavy doors could not sustain another impact. The central panels shattered inward, sending sharp shards of splintered wood flying across the study. The creature rammed its massive shoulder against the gap, violently shoving the bookshelf aside. The abomination stepped into the room, its mismatched hooves cracking against the floorboards. The dead glass eyes of the elk head reflected the small flame of the lighter. It lowered its massive antlers, preparing to charge directly into our chests. "Light it!" I screamed. My partner thrust the lighter forward, touching the open flame directly to the alcohol-soaked strip of curtain fabric. The cloth ignited instantly, a bright, aggressive line of fire racing down toward the neck of the glass bottle. The creature lunged forward, its jaws snapping violently in the air. I stepped directly into the charge, winding my arm back, and threw the glass bottle directly into the center of the creature's matted chest. The thick glass shattered explosively upon impact. The alcohol coated the dry, brittle fur and the exposed, yellowed stuffing protruding from the bursting sutures. The burning wick met the highly flammable liquid with a violent, concussive whoosh. The entire creature ignited like a massive candle. The dry hide, the ancient preservation chemicals, and the synthetic stuffing caught fire instantly, creating a towering, roaring inferno in the center of the study. The creature thrashed violently, its hooves stomping chaotic rhythms against the burning rug. The massive antlers tore blindly into the drywall, ripping heavy chunks of plaster free as the fire rapidly consumed the stitched flesh. An inhuman, echoing shriek filled the enclosed room. The sound was deafening, vibrating deep within my teeth and my skull. The vessel rapidly collapsed under the intense heat. The burning hide withered, the legs buckled, and the massive monstrosity crashed heavily to the floor, instantly reducing to a charred, smoking heap of blackened wire, melted glass, and grey ash. The oppressive atmosphere within the cabin vanished instantly, leaving only the choking smoke of a fire. We did not wait to investigate the ashes. My partner grabbed his fire extinguisher, aggressively dousing the burning rug, and then we ran. We sprinted through the dark living room, past the gored victim, to burst through the splintered front doors into the freezing exterior. We sat leaning against the cold metal of our cruiser, gasping for clean air, waiting for the state police and the fire department to arrive. We meticulously coordinated our official statements. We wrote exhaustive reports detailing an unknown human intruder who fled into the dense tree line, and an accidental fire caused by the homeowner knocking over candles during a violent struggle. We entirely omitted any mention of a walking, stitched freak. The state detectives accepted the narrative without question. I am posting this account today as a desperate warning to the public. If you are a collector, or if you frequently purchase estate sale hunting trophies, you need to understand the danger of bringing those items into your home. You do not know what kind of energetic tether the taxidermist bound to the hide, and you do not know what kind of spiritual vapor might be utilizing the glass eyes to watch you sleep. I know this, because before the state detectives cleared the scene, I utilized my authority as the responding officer to securely impound one small item from the house. A small, perfectly preserved stuffed red fox. I placed the evidence bag firmly on the left side of my desk at the precinct before my shift ended. I went down the hall to get a cup of coffee. When I returned to my desk, 3 minutes later, the sealed evidence bag was sitting on the extreme opposite side of my desk, and the fox was facing the other way. Take a second with that ending. The whole story, all that chaos and fire, and then 2 quiet sentences. That is how you close a story. Let us keep moving though, because this next one starts with a journal pulled from a shipwreck on Lake Superior. A Navy medic, a ship called the Lily Marina, and a naked man they found standing on the ice. The captain gave one warning before they brought him aboard. Story 2. If you see a man out on the ice, do not let him aboard. Everyone knows the legend of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, especially if you reside within the Great Lakes region. The 729-foot bulk carrier was comparable to the Titanic. She was launched on June 8, 1958, and would only last 17 years. Multiple bad omens occurred on the morning of her launch. 3 attempts to break a champagne bottle during the christening, a large wave that took out infrastructure below, and a heart attack resulting in a death. In hindsight, it seemed like she was cursed from the start. When she sank on November 10, 1975, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald went down with all 29 passengers. Lake Superior holds a great many secrets, just as much a tomb as it is a body of water. Cold, deep, and dark. Even so, 3 underwater explorations were made in 1989, 1994, and 1995. During the last exploration, the Fitzgerald's 200-pound bronze bell was recovered, as was another item, but it did not belong to this ship. It was a journal, recovered from a smaller unknown ship that had sunk the same day, the contents of which I will recount for you here. My name is Evan Guthrie. I work at the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum in Whitefish Point, Michigan. I was tasked with digitizing the more interesting portions of our historical artifacts. The journal I will be transcribing belonged to Luther Blackburn and tells a story of the fiercest winter storm and the man they found out on the ice. November 8th, 1975, Superior, Wisconsin. The air has a chill the likes of which I have never known. Even as my gloved hands grip the pen, my knuckles ache. The room I have rented was humble and small, just the thing I needed. Tomorrow we leave at sunup aboard the SS Lily Marina, and I will be serving as ship medic. I hope the other members of the crew and I get along. It would be unfortunate otherwise. L.J. Blackburn. November 9th, 1975. Lake Superior. I would have never guessed my first day back on a ship would end so poorly. Captain Thurston greeted me merrily and introduced me to most of the crew. Only a handful of names stuck. Case, the ship cook, a larger man with curly red hair. Richard, the first mate, reeked of cigarettes and wore a blue stocking cap. A few others. Wesley, Howard, Lyle. They seemed like a good crew. I was almost comfortable when the commotion began. Out of seemingly nowhere, the weather started to change. Brisk waves and whipping wind had turned to large flakes of snow. In almost whiteout conditions, chunks of ice started to appear within the water, and that was when something truly odd happened. "There's a man in the water," the lookout called from his perch. "Man down, man in the water." Most of the crew looked around wildly, wondering who had been stupid enough to fall overboard. We were all still squared away safely on the ship. The man in the water was a stranger, standing atop a large chunk of ice, still as a statue, sailing on it like a surfboard. "What are you waiting for? Let's bring them aboard," the captain's voice rang out. When the man was pulled from the water, the crew was in shock. He was completely naked, skin paler than the winter scene around us. His hands and feet were starting to turn black. He was also taller than most men I had seen, probably coming in at nearly 7 feet tall. I took the lead toward the medical bay and beckoned them to follow me. In the brief glimpses I got of his face, I felt a strange sense of familiarity. How could I have known this man? I connected a warmed saline drip, added rubber hot packs to all of the arterial zones, armpits, between the legs, wrists, ankles, neck, covered them in layer after layer of blankets. Then I sat down in my chair and prayed. After a few hours, I slipped out to get some food from the galley. Case greeted me with a warm smile, beef stew in one pot, cornbread in another. I ate quickly and returned to the medical bay. When I returned, my eyes widened to their fullest point. The bed was empty. Blankets and hot water bottles littered the floor. The IV had been ripped out, the bloody cord laying on the ground. He must have woken up and panicked from the unfamiliarity. I wandered the halls looking for any signs of life. That was when I noticed the trail of blood, just a few drops here and there. The trail led toward where we were keeping our haul, a collection of dried soybeans and corn for farm usage. And that was when I heard the sound of crunching. It sounded like biting down on week-old stale bread baked too long, or like rocks being slammed together. Crunch, 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 then cough, cough, crunch. The door to the hold was ajar when it should have been closed. "Hello," I whispered softly. When I finally grew the courage to peek inside, I saw something I could never unsee. The man from the ice had his back to me, his naked body, shades of white and purple, was squatting down in front of an opened bag of feed. Using both hands interchangeably, he shoveled heaping handfuls of dried soybeans into his open mouth. He tried to chew and swallow, but his bloated cheeks spared no room. He could barely even close his jaw, his mouth was so full. Then I watched as he projectile vomited whole kernels of soybean back onto the floor. "Please, stop what you are doing. That is not meant to be eaten," I cried out. The man stopped and turned to face me. With eyes as wide and as sad as a child's, his mouth fell open. Out of his slack jaw fell tons of seeds, covered in strings of saliva. I stifled a gag and pushed forward into the room. Slowly, the man stood up from his crouch. As he reached his full height, I felt a shiver pass through my body. His tall and slender frame felt imposing. It felt like when I was a child standing in front of a scarecrow on my grandfather's farm. Something horrific and just a step shy from being human. "Please come back to the medical bay with me. If you are hungry, let me fetch you some food." I am hungry," the man finally choked out when we made it back. His voice sounded guttural and forced. Once the IV was back in his arm, I went to Case and explained the situation. Case agreed to bring bowls of stew. Sitting alone in the room with the man while we waited felt like torture. Over and over again, he repeated that he was hungry. The same tone and cadence every time, like a broken record. "2 orders of stew coming up," Case said as he entered. The man from the ice bolted upright in the bed, towering over us, even when sitting down. He held out his frostbitten hands greedily, took one of the bowls, and without using the spoon, upturned it and drank it down in big gulps. Some of the thick broth trailed down either cheek, spilling onto his bare chest. He finished the first bowl and immediately reached for the second. "What were you doing out on the ice?" I finally asked. "Hungry. Waiting," he responded between gulps. "Waiting for what?" "Waiting for food." When the man was done, he drew his hand across his mouth and then licked the back of his hand, not wanting to waste a drop. Like a cat having a bath. "Do you have a name?" I asked. "Lauren," was all he said in response, still licking at the back of his hand. "Are you still hungry, Lauren?" Case asked, chuckling. "Hungry," Lauren replied. He sounded like a robot, or like he was speaking while inhaling. "I'll run back to the kitchen and get you some more." As Case turned on his heel, I sat back down in my chair and pretended to read, all the while watching Lauren with my peripheral. He had stopped licking his hand, but he had started to chew on his lips numbly, peeling off the dead skin that had grown on them, chewing and swallowing. Then he bit down harder. I heard the sickening pop of teeth through skin. "Oh no," I said, jumping up from the chair. I screamed for him to stop, reaching for his arm as he struggled. He tried to keep me away, further biting into the skin around his mouth. He tore his own lips with a sickening sound, blood springing to the surface. That was when Case burst through the door, dropping the stew at his feet. "Hold him while I prepare the sedative," I yelled. I pierced Lauren's IV and depressed the plunger. Pretty soon the struggling and the biting stopped. I looked down at the horror below me. Lauren's face was smiling, even though he was out cold. Not because he wanted to. In the short time that had passed, he had managed to tear off both the top and bottom lip, gums and teeth exposed in a haunting and bloody smile. As I write this, the memory of his face flashed through my mind again, paired with a wanted poster and a full name, Lauren Anderson. Wanted for looting and piracy. One of the greediest men to ever sail on Superior's waters. Even though I finally remembered who he was, it did me no good. I still had to treat him the same. Tonight I will sleep in the room next to the medbay with one eye open. I am scared of what is to come if he awakes from his slumber. L.J. Blackburn, November 10th, 1975, Lake Superior. I was awoken to the sounds of frantic voices and pounding on my door. Richard was screaming my name and throwing himself against the metal. He snaked inside and shut the door behind him, clutching one of his arms, which was bleeding profusely. It looked like his hand was dangling from a thread, wet bones showing through the fat and tissue. "Richard, what happened? That thing bit me," he screamed back, clutching his wounded limb to his chest. Without a second thought, I ripped the belt from my pants and applied a tourniquet just below his elbow. The blood slowed immediately. What thing? That monster we pulled from the ice. I know it looks like a man, but it is not a man. Men do not run around on all fours, tearing flesh from bone with their teeth. I told Richard to stay put and exited the room. In the kitchen, my heart fell into my stomach. Chunks of skin with curly red hair littered the ground. Fragments of bone crunched underfoot. Further behind the counter was Casey's torn body. His abdominal cavity had been opened up. Ribs broke through and pointed at odd angles. His skin was torn and jagged. Body covered in large bite marks. His face and most of his scalp was missing, the whites of his eyes and teeth glittering under the light. Even during my tours in Vietnam, this was by far the worst thing I had ever seen. Time of death: 10:22 a.m. A scream directed me to the upper levels. Then I heard the crack of gunfire. 2 more shots. Then an uncomfortable silence. Sitting on the stairs to the deck was Captain Thurston, bloody and breathing hard, missing half of one leg and several large chunks from his left arm and shoulder. "Do not worry about me, Luther. Take this," Thurston said, handing me a revolver. Its weight was heavy in my shaking hand. "Sir, I don't understand what is going on. You have to kill it, and if you can't, you have to sink the ship." He gripped my arm tightly with his one good hand, staring into my eyes with a fierceness I have never known. "It can't be allowed to make it back to land," was all he said before passing out. I had no time to tend to his wounds. Another scream tore through the silence, this one different from the rest. Not a scream of pain, a guttural wail based in insatiable hunger when I finally made my way onto the deck. Lauren had transformed into something that only a nightmare could conjure. His pale skin stretched and pulled over bones that were way too large to be contained. His height had grown even more immense. Nearly 8 feet tall now. His bared teeth and lipless face were a grotesque sight. Yellowed eyes stared back at me from across the deck. I held up the revolver and aimed at his head. As the shot rang out, Lauren took off like it was the start of a race, tearing across the deck on all fours. I watched him gallop through the large snowflakes. The shot had missed. When I cocked back the hammer for the second time, Lauren grew ever closer. This time the shot landed, hitting him right between the eyes. Even so, he kept running. "Keep him on the deck! Keep him in sight!" Richard's voice called out. I could not see him, but I could hear him loud and clear. "What are you gonna do?" I yelled back. "I'm gonna ram us into those rocks to starboard." That was when Lauren changed direction, steering himself away from me. At first, I was grateful to be out of harm's way, until I realized where he was going. Lauren was headed for Richard, and even as I shot him a second and third time, Lauren did not falter. He kept galloping on all fours, looking more animal than human. I didn't make it in time. I wasn't able to stop Lauren. I wasn't able to save Richard. I wasn't able to save anyone. All I could do was shut the door to the room they were in and lock it. As I finish writing this entry, I shall seal this journal away into my waterproof oilskin. The rocks are coming, and they are coming fast. I am the last man alive on the SS Lily Marina, and I will go down with the ship. If by chance this somehow makes it back to land, And if you ever see a naked man out on the ice, do not help them. Lake Superior is insatiable, and I am merely the next to temporarily quell her hunger. And that is 2 for tonight. A police officer who burned a dead elk head to save his own life, and a ship medic who pulled something from the ice that should have stayed there. Thanks for being here. Stay safe out there, and I will see you in the next one.